At the head of our Thanksgiving table, Evelyn Scott said, "I'm leaving," holding up a wine glass as though to make a toast. "I'm in love with my secretary." A startled quiet fell over our dining room, and the turkey got cold. With his fork halfway to his lips, our son David froze. Katie, our daughter, became enthralled with the cranberry sauce as she gazed at her dish. My sister Patricia's mouth actually fell open, and her husband Robert appeared to be fascinated with his handkerchief. Scott went on with unwarranted pride. "She's 22, as though being young were a feat in and of itself. And she's everything you're not." I put my silverware down gently, used my napkin to wipe the corner of my lips, and turned to face my husband of 25 years. I said, "Good timing, actually," in a calm voice despite my heart pounding. "I'm Evelyn Hargrove, a 51-year-old senior accountant with Grand Rapids, Michigan's Westridge Financial. I've been juggling spreadsheets by day and family obligations by night for 25 years, creating what I believe to be a stable existence with Scott, our 2 kids, and our small but cozy house in the Heritage Hill area. My goals were straightforward: to spend my latter years with the man I loved, to see our kids grow up and start their own lives, to ultimately retire, and maybe to take some trips. Now, Scott's midlife crisis was getting in the way of me. It showed itself as his obsession with Jessica, the young secretary he had recruited for his insurance company 3 months prior. The public humiliation, the conscious decision to announce his leaving at our family Thanksgiving meal in front of our kids and relatives, as if daring me to cause a scene was just as unfair as the betrayal. "We can talk about the specifics later," Scott replied generously as he raised his wine glass. "To new beginnings." His toast was not accompanied by anyone. With tears running down her cheeks, Katie got up and hurried out of the room. David gave his father a disgusted and incredulous look. Quietly, I murmured, "I think you should leave. It's still my house, too." Scott said, sounding arrogant, as if he had already figured out his edge, "I'll pack some things tomorrow." I started to methodically clear plates as our guests clumsily excused themselves, and Scott withdrew to his study with the remnants of the wine bottle. Despite the ruins of my marriage scattered over the dining room, I felt strangely at ease. I saw our answering machines flashing light when I was loading the dishwasher. I hit play and heard my Uncle Edward's lawyer's voice again. "James Benedict is calling, Evelyn. I have important news about your uncle's property. Give me a call as soon as you can." Uncle Edward, my mother's brother, a lifelong bachelor who'd made a fortune in commercial real estate, had passed away 3 weeks earlier. I'd always been his favorite niece, but I had no expectations from his will beyond perhaps a keepsake or small remembrance. Little did I know that Scott's dramatic exit was about to be overshadowed by an even more dramatic arrival. Scott and I met during our senior year at Michigan State. He was charming, ambitious, with a quick smile that seemed perpetually aimed in my direction. I was studious, organized, already planning my career in accounting. We balanced each other, his spontaneity softening my rigidity, my practicality grounding his dreams. At least, that's the story we told ourselves. We married young at 26, after I had established myself at a local accounting firm, and Scott had launched his insurance agency with a small business loan. The early years were lean but happy. We saved diligently for a down payment on our Heritage Hill Victorian, a fixer-upper that consumed our weekends for nearly a decade. I took only 6 weeks of maternity leave with each child, returning to work while juggling the demands of motherhood and career. As Scott's business grew, so did his aspirations. The modest office expanded to a prime downtown location. His wardrobe gradually upgraded from department store suits to custom tailoring. He joined the country club, not for the golf he rarely played, but for the connections that might lead to high-net-worth clients. I supported these endeavors, believing they were investments in our shared future. My own career progressed steadily, if unspectacularly. I became known for my meticulous work and ethical standards, eventually reaching senior accountant status at Westridge Financial. My salary provided consistent support during the inevitable downturns in Scott's commission-based income. Uncle Edward had always approved of my practical approach to life. "You're the aunt to all those grasshoppers," he'd say during our monthly lunches, always preparing, always looking ahead. When he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 6 months ago, I'd visited him weekly, bringing home-cooked meals he rarely ate, and company he seemed to value more than I'd realized. Looking back, I can identify the warning signs in my marriage. Scott's increasing criticism of my sensible clothing and predictable routines, his sudden interest in fitness at 49, the new convertible purchased without discussion, the late nights at the office that smelled of unfamiliar perfume. Classic midlife crisis behaviors I recognized but dismissed, telling myself our foundation was too solid to crumble from such cliches. Men go through phases, my sister Patricia assured me when I confided my concerns. Edward went through something similar at 50. "Remember the motorcycle?" So I waited for the phase to pass, believing that 25 years of marriage had earned me patience and understanding. Even when Scott mentioned hiring Jessica, describing her as bright and intuitive despite her lack of experience, I suppressed my unease. She was younger than our daughter, after all. Surely Scott wouldn't be so predictable. 2 weeks ago, I'd stopped by his office unexpectedly, bringing lunch as a surprise. The receptionist's pitying glance should have prepared me for finding his door locked, hushed giggling emanating from within. I left the sandwiches with the receptionist and drove back to work, telling myself there must be a reasonable explanation. I chose trust over suspicion, loyalty over evidence. Now, watching Scott refill his wine glass in solitary celebration of destroying our family, I wondered if I had been loyal to a man who had never truly existed. The morning after Thanksgiving dawned with a crystalline clarity typical of Michigan Novembers. I'd slept fitfully on the living room sofa, unwilling to share the bedroom with Scott. He'd stumbled up the stairs well past midnight, the empty wine bottle abandoned in his study. I made coffee and called James Benedict's office, leaving a message with his secretary. Still in yesterday's clothes, I walked upstairs to collect fresh attire, only to find Scott already awake and packing. "Jessica's apartment is too small for both of us," he explained without prompting, stuffing shirts into a suitcase. "I'll be staying at the Parkview Hotel until we find something suitable." "We?" The casual use of the plural stung more than I expected. "When did it start?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm. Scott paused, perhaps taken aback by my direct question. "Does it matter?" 25 years of marriage deserves at least honesty about its end. He sighed, sitting heavily on the bed we'd shared for decades. "July, at the company picnic." She was interested. Attentive. His expression took on a defensive edge. "Do you know how long it's been since you were genuinely interested in anything about me, Evelyn?" Jessica listens. She's excited about my ideas, my plans. "She's 22, I replied flatly. "Everything is exciting at 22. "It's not just the age," Scott insisted. "She sees me. The real me. The me that got buried under mortgages and college funds and life insurance policies." I studied my husband, the thinning hair he'd recently started dyeing, the expensive watch that had replaced the one I'd given him on our 10th anniversary, the designer clothes that strained slightly against his middle-aged paunch. Who was this man who could throw away a quarter-century of shared history for the admiration of someone barely older than our children? "I think what hurts most," I said carefully, "is that you didn't respect me enough to end things privately." Scott had the grace to look momentarily ashamed, then his expression hardened. "I needed witnesses. Your family needs to understand this isn't just some fling or midlife crisis they can talk you through. This is real." The calculated cruelty of his public announcement suddenly became clear. He'd wanted to humiliate me, to make reconciliation impossible, to shift blame for our marriages and entirely onto his shoulders so I wouldn't fight for it. "I see," I said simply. The doorbell interrupted whatever Scott might have said next. I went downstairs to find a courier with a certified letter requiring my signature. The return address was James Benedict's law firm. I opened it in the kitchen, scanning the formal legal language until the key phrases leapt from the page: sole beneficiary, controlling interest, comprehensive portfolio, and a figure that made me clutch the kitchen counter for support. 4.7 million. Uncle Edward, who had lived modestly despite his wealth, had left me his entire estate, the commercial properties, the investments, even his charitable foundation. The inheritance was structured as separate property, established after my marriage, explicitly designated as belonging exclusively to me rather than the marital estate. The letter included a handwritten note from Uncle Edward: "Evelyn, I've always admired your loyalty and strength. Life has a way of testing both. Consider this your safety net, whatever comes next." Somehow he had known, or at least suspected, that I might need independent means. Had he seen something in Scott that I had missed, or had my own concerns slipped into our conversations more than I realized? Upstairs, I could hear Scott on the phone, his voice animated as he described his liberation to someone, Jessica presumably. My numbness was giving way to something else, not quite anger, not quite relief, but a clarifying sense of possibility. I carefully folded the letter and placed it in my purse, then began making a mental list of immediate actions required. This wasn't how I'd expected my life to unfold at 51, but as Uncle Edward's final gift demonstrated, sometimes the unexpected brings its own kind of freedom. I waited until Scott left with his suitcases before calling James Benedict and confirming the details of my inheritance. The attorney suggested we meet immediately to discuss next steps, including taking control of Uncle Edward's business interests. "Your uncle was quite explicit about his wishes," James explained. "He wanted you to have complete freedom to make your own decisions, both personally and professionally." After scheduling an appointment for Monday morning, I called Patricia, who arrived 30 minutes later with a bottle of wine and fierce, protective energy. "That absolute bastard," she fumed, pacing my kitchen. "After everything you've done for him, the sacrifices, the support, it's over." I interrupted, pouring us each a glass. "What matters now is moving forward with dignity." Patricia paused mid-stride. "You seem surprisingly calm." I slid Uncle Edward's letter across the counter. Patricia's eyes widened as she read, her expression transforming from outrage to astonishment. "Holy Evelyn, you're rich." It appeared years, so I acknowledged the reality still sinking in. "The question is, what to do about it and about Scott?" Patricia's grin turned predatory. "Oh, this is too perfect. Mr. Midlife Crisis thinks he's trading up for a younger model, not realizing his reliable old wife just hit the jackpot." "He doesn't know yet," I clarified. "And I'm not sure how or when to tell him." "You don't owe him anything," Patricia insisted. "He humiliated you in front of your entire family. Let him find out when it's too late." Part of me agreed with her vindictive impulse, but 25 years of marriage deserved more consideration than an impulsive reaction. I needed time to process both Scott's betrayal and my sudden wealth. Over the weekend, I maintained an outward calm while internally vacillating between grief and calculation. The children came and went, offering support and expressing their own anger toward their father. Katie refused to speak to him when he called. David agreed to meet for coffee, but returned seething with indignation. "He tried to justify it, Mom," David reported. "He said he deserved happiness after sacrificing his prime years for the family, as if you didn't sacrifice just as much." By Monday morning, I had composed myself enough to meet James Benedict at his downtown office. The attorney, a contemporary of Uncle Edward's with silver hair and perceptive eyes, greeted me warmly. "Your uncle spoke of you often," he said as we settled into his wood-paneled conference room. "He admired your steady character tremendously." For 2 hours, James outlined the extent of my inheritance: 6 commercial properties in Grand Rapids and surrounding areas, a diverse investment portfolio, controlling interest in a property management company, and stewardship of a charitable foundation supporting educational initiatives. Edward believed strongly in financial independence, James explained, sliding a folder across the table. Particularly for women. His mother, your grandmother, was left destitute after his father's death. He never forgot that vulnerability. The inheritance was specifically structured to remain separate from marital assets, a legal distinction that would become crucial in the coming weeks. As I left James's office with a stack of documents to review, my phone chimed with a text from Scott. Need to discuss finances. Dinner tonight. I agreed to meet at a neutral location, a quiet Italian restaurant downtown where we'd once celebrated anniversaries in happier times. Scott arrived looking simultaneously smug and uneasy, kissing my cheek as if our marriage weren't lying in ruins between us. You're looking well, he observed, studying me with slight confusion. Perhaps he'd expected red eyes and a disheveled appearance, visible evidence of my devastation. What did you want to discuss? I asked, bypassing small talk. Scott cleared his throat. I've been thinking about the house. It makes sense for you to stay there, of course, but given its value, we should discuss compensation. Compensation? My share of the equity, he clarified. I'm thinking we could arrange a buyout over time. I know you don't have liquid assets to purchase my portion outright. The presumption was breathtaking. Not only was he leaving me for a woman half my age, but he expected me to make payments to him while he built his new life. I need time to think about it, I said carefully. Scott nodded magnanimously. Of course, it's a lot to process. But Jessica and I will need capital for our fresh start. I'm sure you understand. What I understood with perfect clarity was that Scott saw me as nothing more than a financial resource to be drained before being discarded, a stepping stone to his new life with Jessica. I'll have my attorney contact you, I managed, fighting to maintain my composure. Scott's eyebrows rose. You have an attorney already? That seems unnecessarily adversarial. Evelyn, he added, I thought we could handle this amicably. Amicable? I echoed the word, tasting bitter. Was humiliating me at Thanksgiving dinner amicable? Scott had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. I admit the timing was perhaps insensitive, he said. But I needed to make a clean break for Jessica's benefit. You mean... I glanced at his watch, a nervous habit I recognized from countless budget discussions throughout our marriage. Jessica deserves a fresh start without shadows from my past. She's young, with her whole life ahead of her, and I'm not. I suppose the words emerged more sharply than intended. That's not what I meant. He reached across the table, attempting to take my hand. I withdrew it smoothly. You'll be fine, Evelyn. You've always been resilient. Resilient. The word hung between us, his subtle acknowledgement of how often I'd bent without breaking during our marriage, the financial strains when his business was starting, the years of balancing childcare with full-time work, the emotional labor of maintaining our home and relationships. Always adapting, always accommodating. You're right, I agreed, finally. I am resilient. Something in my tone must have alerted him. His expression shifted from patronizing confidence to weariness. We should discuss the practical matters, he pivoted, division of assets, support considerations. I've been looking at our financials, I interrupted. There are some irregularities I'd like to address. Scott blinked rapidly. Irregularities? Withdrawals from our joint savings. Approximately $47,000 over the past 6 months. His face flushed. Business expenses, temporary cash flow issues. I was going to replace it. With what? Your agency's profits have been declining for 3 years. The flash of alarm in his eyes confirmed what I'd suspected. Scott had been systematically siphoning our savings, likely to finance his new lifestyle with Jessica, expensive dinners, hotel rooms, perhaps gifts. The building blocks of his affair. How would you know about the agency's profits? He demanded, defensive now. I'm an accountant, Scott. I notice patterns. He recovered quickly, smoothing his features into what I recognized as his client-facing smile. This is exactly why we need to approach our separation logically. We're both under stress, making accusations. It's not an accusation if it's demonstrably true, I countered, sliding my phone across the table with our bank statement displayed. The withdrawals align perfectly with your late nights at the office and weekend client meetings. Scott stared at the evidence, then met my gaze with cold calculation. Fine. I've been planning my exit. Can you blame me? 25 years with the same predictable, boring routine, the same predictable, boring wife. The cruelty was intentional, designed to wound, to ensure I would retreat into hurt rather than pursue the financial discrepancies. It might have worked a week earlier. I'd like the money returned, I said calmly. All of it. He laughed dismissively. That's not happening. Consider it the price of your freedom. Freedom isn't what you're selling, Scott, I said. It's betrayal packaged as liberation. His expression hardened. You've always been judgmental. Jessica accepts me as I am. Jessica doesn't know who you are, I said. But she will. Something in my voice must have registered because genuine concern flickered across his features. What does that? Before I could respond, Scott's phone chimed with an incoming call. The name Jessica flashed on the screen. Take it, I encouraged. I'm sure she's eager to hear about your amicable divorce plans. He hesitated, then answered, stepping away from the table for privacy. I watched him, gesturing animatedly, his back turned to me as he undoubtedly reassured his young lover that everything was proceeding as planned. I used the moment to signal for the check. As I waited, I mentally reviewed what I'd learned from my meeting with James Benedict that morning, information I hadn't yet shared with Scott. The pending inheritance was only part of the picture. Uncle Edward's private investigator had uncovered something far more damaging to Scott's carefully constructed narrative. 2 years earlier, Scott had taken out a substantial business loan, using our house as collateral without my knowledge or consent. My forged signature on the documents constituted fraud. The loan was now in default, explaining his urgency to discuss finances. Scott wasn't just leaving me for a younger woman, he was attempting to flee a financial disaster of his own making. In the 2 weeks following our restaurant meeting, I executed a careful strategy on 3 fronts. First, I met with a forensic accountant recommended by James Benedict to document Scott's financial malfeasance. Second, I consulted with a divorce attorney specializing in cases involving fraud. Third, I took control of Uncle Edward's business interests, immersing myself in the details of commercial property management. Throughout this period, Scott continued his campaign to extract money from our marriage. His texts alternated between nostalgia, remember our trip to Mock Island? We had something special, and thinly veiled threats. Jessica thinks I should get a forensic valuation of your accounting practice. I responded minimally, buying time while evidence accumulated. The forensic accountant discovered Scott had not only defaulted on the fraudulent business loan, but had opened credit cards in my name, running up substantial debt. More damning still, he'd been systematically falsifying his agency's financial records to conceal declining revenues, potentially insurance fraud. My divorce attorney, Maureen Winters, was blunt in her assessment. We have enough for criminal charges, not just divorce proceedings. The question is, what do you want? What I wanted was complicated. Justice, certainly. Protection of my assets, absolutely. But revenge? The emotion felt foreign, unproductive. I want a fair resolution that acknowledges the reality of our situation, I told her. And I want it concluded quickly. Maureen nodded approvingly. We'll file immediately, requesting temporary orders to protect your assets. The inheritance simplifies things. With your financial security assured, we can focus on untangling the fraud. The plan was proceeding smoothly until Scott surprised me by bringing Jessica to our house, my house, to collect some personal items. I arrived home from a meeting with Uncle Edward's property manager to find them in our bedroom. Scott was packing cufflinks and watches, while Jessica lounged on our bed, scrolling through her phone. You must be Evelyn, she said without looking up. Scott's told me so much about you. I studied the young woman who had facilitated the destruction of my marriage. Pretty in the expected ways, slim, blonde, with the confidence of someone who hadn't yet encountered significant disappointment. She wore expensive clothes that still had the fresh shine of recent purchase. "Scott's $47,000 walking and talking," I said. "Has he told you about the fraud investigation?" Jessica's head snapped up. Scott emerged from the closet, his expression thunderous. "Evelyn, that's enough. Enough for the defaulted loan, the forged signatures, the credit card debt?" "She's lying," Scott told Jessica, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Am I?" I removed a folder from my bag, extending it toward Jessica. "These are copies of the relevant documents. You might want to reconsider hitching your wagon to a sinking ship." Scott lunged for the folder, but Jessica was quicker, grabbing it and leafing through the contents with increasing alarm. "What is this?" she demanded, holding up a credit card statement. "You said you were taking me to Paris after the divorce." "I can explain," Scott began, but Jessica was already moving toward the door, folder clutched to her chest. "You said you were financially secure," she accused. "You said Evelyn was the problem." After she left, Scott turned on me with cold fury. "You've ruined everything." "You managed that entirely on your own," I replied. The next morning, Morin called with unexpected news. Scott had contacted a different attorney, requesting an emergency settlement conference. "He's desperate to settle quickly," she explained, offering to admit to the fraudulent loan in exchange for not involving law enforcement. It seemed Jessica's departure had shattered Scott's illusions of a consequence-free fresh start. With his relationship imploding and legal jeopardy looming, he was finally facing reality. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt oddly hollow. 25 years of marriage, ending not with dignity, but with desperate negotiation to avoid criminal charges. "What do you recommend?" I asked Morin. "We're in a strong position. We could push for everything: the house, your full retirement accounts, even reparations for the fraud." The decision crystallized with surprising clarity. "Schedule the conference, but I have specific terms in mind. I want a clean break, complete separation, no further contact." Morin seemed surprised. "No punitive measures? No restitution?" I thought of Scott and Jessica in my bedroom, their casual invasion of the space where I'd spent a quarter-century of my life. How quickly it had all been devalued, discarded. "The fraud documentation goes into an escrow account," I decided. "If he honors the divorce terms, it remains sealed. If not, consequences." Morin finished, approval in her voice. "Exactly." The settlement conference was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, I had a property empire to learn. The settlement conference took place in Morin's sleek downtown office, overlooking the Grand River. Scott arrived alone, his normally immaculate appearance showing signs of strain, wrinkled shirt, shadows under his eyes, the expensive watch conspicuously absent from his wrist. His attorney, a nervous man with a perpetual frown, opened with conciliatory language about mutual mistakes and moving forward amicably. Morin's icy smile stopped him mid-platitude. "Let's be clear about the situation," she said, sliding documents across the table. "Fraud, identity theft, financial misrepresentation. These aren't mutual mistakes." Scott stared at the table, avoiding my gaze as his attorney reviewed the evidence. "My client is prepared to offer significant concessions," the attorney began. "That's fortunate," Morin replied, "because my client is prepared to file criminal charges." The threat hung in the air like a blade. Scott finally looked up, meeting my eyes with a mixture of resentment and fear. "What do you want, Evelyn?" he asked. I opened the folder I'd brought, not legal documents, but photographs of our life together, our wedding day, the children's births, the house when we first purchased it before renovations. The progression of a quarter-century of shared history. "I want you to understand what you threw away," I said quietly. "Not just me, but your integrity, your children's respect, your professional reputation." "Is this necessary?" his attorney interjected. "We're here to negotiate terms." "The terms are simple," I continued, ignoring him. You sign over all rights to the house. You relinquish any claim to my inheritance or business interests. You agree to pay back the fraudulent loan and credit card debt. Scott's face reddened. That's everything. What am I supposed to live on? I slid a final document across the table, the deed to a small commercial property on the outskirts of Grand Rapids, recently purchased with a portion of my inheritance. This building houses your insurance agency, I explained. The lease is paid for 5 years. It's your fresh start, Scott. More than you deserve, but less than you expected. His eyes widened as understanding dawned. You own my building now. I own a lot of things now, I replied calmly. Sign the papers. 6 months after the Thanksgiving that ended my marriage, I stood in the lobby of Hargrove Properties, watching workers install the new company signage. The commercial real estate firm I had inherited from Uncle Edward now bore my name, a symbolic reclamation of my identity. Scott had signed the divorce papers that January afternoon, his hand trembling slightly as he accepted the terms. His attempt to craft a triumphant exit from our marriage had instead left him humbled, diminished. Quickly calculating the diminishing rewards of a relationship with a guy on the verge of financial catastrophe, Jessica never came back. The betrayal of their father had been seen differently by our children. Katie remained aloof, consenting to lunches on occasion, but not talking about anything private. Following his initial outburst, David had developed a careful, constrained relationship with his father. Both had quietly taken delight in my handling of the matter. Katie had noted, "You didn't let him destroy you," during a recent meal. Wasn't that what he desired? To shatter you in order to save him the guilt. Maybe she was correct. The casual cruelty and the public statement had been planned to portray me as the abandoned wife, a character that would defend his behavior to our social circle and, more significantly, to himself. Rather, I had come out stronger, richer, and more complete than ever. In my first 6 months of ownership, I added 3 buildings to Uncle Edward's property holdings, making good use of the accounting abilities I had developed over my career. The only thing that connected us was a monthly electronic rent payment from Scott's insurance company, which was still based in my building. I had heard from common contacts that he had tried online dating but had not been very successful. Younger women lost interest when they learned about his financial limitations, and ladies his own age found his past troubling. My phone rang with a calendar reminder as the installation team completed hanging the sign. I had to meet with James Benedict for dinner to talk about the Educational Foundation's yearly scholarship awards. This year, with an emphasis on women seeking business and financial education, I increased the number of winners. Grand Rapids had turned from winter drab to vivid green by springtime. At 51, I was beginning anew, not with resignation, but with curiosity, expectation, and a hard-won understanding of the distinction between worth and value. Unwritten and wholly mine, the future loomed ahead.